Hi everyone. I'm going to respond to the module 9 clarification questions, particularly these first two here. When I say the first two, the two most popular. One is from Willie Lockman, who got 40 upvotes. Willie, thank you for your question. He says this. He says, I was a little confused on outbidding in the principal strategic logics of costly signaling at work in terrorist campaigns. So we'll talk about that. And we will talk about the second question from Rachel Doucette. 17 upvotes. Thank you, Rachel. She says, can communication really be the key to preventing conflict? Because we can delegate and hold conferences all day long, but can we conclude that maybe the underlying reason for conflict can be the goals and wants of those nations? Ignorance seems to me to be the main source of conflict, ignoring culture and traditions, so one nation can get resources. Okay, I want to take a lot of elements from that and sort of use it to sort of springboard into my answer to Willie Lockman. Communication, the key to preventing conflict. So this is definitely, for me at least, this is the central sort of question in this reading. Right, the central question is, maybe not can communication really be the key to preventing conflict. I think they think that it is, but what sort of communication, right? So we're looking at terrorists in particular. But actually, the way this starts off, we could be talking about other states as well. And one of the arguments, and I think this sort of concurs with what Rachel is thinking, right? One of the, or it at least has relevance to what Rachel's thinking. So one of the reasons why conflict starts, oftentimes the reason that conflict starts is that there's not a clarity on either side, right? Whether this is a terrorist and a government or whether this is a government and another government. There's not clarity about certain things. There might be, it's possible, right, between states, it's possible that there's not a full understanding of the relative power of those states. Right? What I mean by that, and this probably doesn't apply as much to terrorism, right, but it applies mostly to states. So if you have, France and Germany these days, right, which is the more powerful country, right? Which is, if there was going to be a conflict, which one has the relative power in their favor? Because they're fairly close, probably, right? France militarily right now, I think, has a bigger military than Germany, but Germany's economy is bigger than France's, right? And plus, the French military is not so big that it's completely out of the question that depending on the day and depending on like where if we're talking about armed conflict, right, where that sort of armed conflict would take place, under what circumstances it would take place, there might be a different outcome either way. So it might be now. Here's the other thing. It's extremely possible that I don't know the relative power of Germany and France. It's also completely possible that neither the French government nor the German government know the relative power between them. And it could be, right, that really the relative power, maybe Germany is much, much stronger than France. But you, me, and the French government and the German government even perhaps think that maybe it's kind of balanced. But because we can be wrong about that, right, that's sort of, it could lead to conflict, right? It could lead to conflict in the following way. I guess if they both think that they're roughly equal, right, that might be less likely to head to a conflict. No, it might not be. Okay, so let's take that. Let's take that Germany and France think that they're roughly equal, but in reality, nobody knows this, but in reality, Germany is much more powerful, militarily and economically and that sort of thing. Okay, so the French say, so the Germans start asking the French for it's obviously a hypothetical thing, right? But the Germans keep asking for things from the French, asking more and more and more things, and the French say, no, we don't have to give them these things. Right? We're about the same. We have about the same amount of power. We're not giving them anything, right? And then obviously this takes a leap of imagination, these days at least, right? But then the Germans, right, give red line after red line until in the end they say, right, that's it. You're not giving us what we need. We're going to militarily punish you. It might be that if the French had not, and then they do, and then they overwhelm the French, and there's I don't know. they take Alsace and Lorraine or something, right? So of course, this is not something. This is not a script that I'm writing originally, right? This is something from the past. But they take Alsace and Lorraine. So that war maybe could have been avoided if the French had known the truth, right? That the German strength was much stronger than the French understood it. Right? So there's that sort of the uncertainty. It's uncertainty that causes war. Now, communication could overcome that, right? Let's begin. If the Germans had been completely open and completely frank about all the different technologies and plans and training and everything that they had, and the French had been too, and there was complete open communication between the two, open and honest communication, maybe that scenario, that fake scenario I made up, maybe it could have been avoided. But here's the problem with that. The problem with that is that that communication, right? If it's just about talking, right, the Germans would say, let us be honest with you, we have way more capability, material capability and capacity than you do. More industrial capacity, we have a bigger army. Actually, what you don't know is that we have these, we're building these tanks over here, and you can't stop them. Also, by the way, you've built that line of defences along the border. Actually, we're going to come through the Netherlands and Belgium. The thing is, the Germans could say that to the French, right? They could really say that. But the French shouldn't really believe them, right? Because, of course, the Germans have every incentive to bluff, right? To lie about their relative strength and to increase their relative strength in order to make the French do what they've asked them to do. So the French can't really just take their word from it. So this is where, when you say, can communication really be the key to preventing conflict? The thing is, yes, communication, but what sort of communication, right? Because just telling you something doesn't dispel the uncertainty. Just the Germans saying we're way more powerful than you, that doesn't make you less uncertain. You still think, well, yeah, like that's what they're going to say. And the example I think in here is Vietnam, that they're using here is Vietnam. So in the Vietnam case, there wasn't any kind of there was no kind of confusion about which country was the more powerful. Was it the Vietnamese or was it the United States? There was no confusion about that. That was very obvious which country had the most relative power. So that wasn't the issue. But the issue was maybe the resolve. How much resolve did the Vietnamese have to fight off the Americans, right? How much attrition, how much damage would they take? How much death would they take? Either the Americans or the Vietnamese. Well, let's talk about the Vietnamese. So the Vietnamese can't say, hey, to the United States, hey, we're much more powerful than you, right? That's incredible. Nobody would believe that. But they could say something like this: look, you're very powerful. You're going to send your troops over here and you're going to cause a lot of death and destruction, and you're going to really cause a lot of suffering here. But, and here's the thing, the Vietnamese would say, but we are ready and willing to take that destruction. And however much destruction and however many of us you kill, we're going to keep fighting you. We're going to still fight. You can try and wipe us all out, but we're going to keep fighting to the last man. Do you see the same problem exists though? Because of course they're going to say that, right? Of course Vietnam are going to say that because it's cheap to say that. That's what I would say if somebody was threatening me. And I could say that. And and everybody would probably say, everybody probably should say that, right? That's probably what you should say. Look, I know that you're powerful and I know that you can do this to me, but I'm not gonna let go. I'm gonna keep at it and I'm gonna keep the suffering and I'm gonna suffer and I'm gonna cause whatever damage I can to you. Yeah, you should probably say that. That's probably the good way to deal with conflict, at least in international relations. I don't think I should suggest that you do that in your personal lives, but in international relations, that's what Vietnam should say. And because that's what they should say, and because that's what, of course, they would say, we can't really believe them, right? And so now we go down to the terrorist groups, right? We say, okay, the terrorist groups, and this is the costly signaling part of things, right? Costly signaling is a kind of communication, and so I mean, maybe this doesn't prevent conflict, right? Well, maybe it settles conflict. So the idea is that this terrorist group, a small group of people, is usually weak, right? It's usually there's no terrorists are weak, right? They have political goals. They want something probably quite big. Think of what the IRA wanted, right? The IRA wanted the United Kingdom, fairly powerful country as far as countries go. They wanted the United Kingdom to give Northern Ireland to the Republic of Ireland, which is a weak country as far as countries go, right? And then the IRA themselves, obviously, are even weaker than Ireland, right? They're a much smaller group with much more limited resources than the country of Ireland, so they're much more weak than the United States, than the United Kingdom, sorry. And so, and again, it's even for them, right? It's so there's no confusion about who's more powerful, but there might be a confusion about what costs they're willing to bear. What costs are the IRA willing to bear, and how much damage are they willing to impose on the civilians of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland? The United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Civilians, government targets, how much how much resolve do they have, but also how much power do they have? How able are they? So let's stick with this so far. So again, they have every incentive, and it's cheap to tell the British government, we're not going to rest until Northern Ireland is unified with the Republic of Ireland. We're not going to rest until that's happened. Yeah, I could say that too. That's a fairly cheap thing to do. I could send an email saying, I want Northeast England to be its own country, and if you don't, then I'll be then I'll do whatever I can. I'll do all sorts of things to make that happen. Yeah, I could write that email too. So could you. It's cheap. And so the government can't take their word for it, right? They can't just say, oh, well, they said they're pretty resolved. And actually they said that they have, even if they said, look, we're going to bomb your railway lines, we're going to shoot up soldiers in pubs, we're going to, the things that they could say that, but you can't take their word for that, right? Because as we say, talk is cheap. Talk is cheap. That's a big theme of this week. Talk is cheap. So communication through talking, right? Through having conferences, right? Or putting your message in the newspaper, or sending threatening letters or something like that. We can all do that. You can get arrested for it as well, right? So it's not that it doesn't cost you anything actually, but if you're the IRA and you're fairly organized and it's the 1980s and you can do it sort of anonymously, then it's pretty cheap in comparison with some of the other things. So then the communication has to be something a little bit more costly. Right? This is the costly signaling part, right? Communication has to be more costly. We have to do something dangerous. We have to do something that shows our resolve, our power, and our trustworthiness, right? But also undermines the trustworthiness of the other people. So let's talk about those. Those are some of the tactics. There's another question down below. Do terrorist groups have to employ all five strategies to be successful? I won't quite answer that question, but we'll talk a little bit about the five strategies and about how that is communication. Right? These five strategies are communication. Communication is at the heart of them. It's not just talk. Just talk is, again, cheap and doesn't persuade. That's not how terrorists win. Terrorists don't win by making threatening videos, right? Like Osama bin Laden. That doesn't win you anything. What wins you something, right, is action, right? And so then what sort of action? This is the five strategies, and we've got five sort of, the strategies are sort of, they talk about here, sort of intermediate goals. What do we have to do now in order to achieve our ultimate political goal? And they define terrorism. I think it's a useful definition to use. We could talk about it if we were in a class together, but they define terrorism here, I'm going to read it, as the use of violence against civilians by non-state actors, right? That gets rid of all the states, gets them off the hook, by non-state actors to attain political goals. So sometimes people say, well, what about the drug cartels in Mexico? They're terrorists, aren't they? Well, these guys would say, no, they're not terrorists because they don't have a political goal. The political goals, they mention what those look like later on, and they say some of the common goals. What are they? change the policy. I can't find it. Change the policy is one of them of the government. Change the borders of the country, right? Some territorial concessions, like the IRA in Northern Ireland. We want you to give us Northern Ireland. That sort of thing. There's maybe a couple of others there that you might be able to think of. But so it's important to sort of separate, and this is what they want to do. They want to separate the long-term political goal from the strategies, right? So let's do that. So the strategies are these, and this is what we're going to focus on. We're not going to focus so much on the long-term goals, but in order to achieve those long-term goals, we have to have these 5 strategies: attrition, spoiling, intimidation, outbidding, provocation. Okay, and so those 5 are split. If you look at the table on 126, which is what I'm doing when I'm looking down, it's a really handy table to kind of keep in your mind what they're trying to achieve with each strategy. If you look at the enemy column, this is where the target of persuasion is the enemy. So we've talked a lot about this already. They want to, let's take a terrorist group. Usually their enemy is a government, right? Think of the ANC, Nelson Mandela, and the apartheid government of South Africa, and think of the IRA. Those are the ones that I think about because it's sort of what I grew up with. Think about whether this really applies to radical Islamism and terrorists that follow that. Who's the audience, right? Who's the enemy? Maybe it's the United States government, oftentimes, or the United States people, perhaps. Right? But to your enemy, whoever your enemy is, what you're trying to show is that you have the power, you have the resolve. Let's take those 2 first. You have the power and the resolve. Not only do I, and this is what we mostly talked about, resolve. Like I'm gonna make you pay, and I'm gonna suffer. I know I'll suffer. I know my people will suffer. I know my family will suffer. But I'm willing to sacrifice all that. I'm willing to have my friends killed, my family killed. I'm willing to die myself. Now we can say that. That's easy. But to really communicate that effectively, to signal that, we've got to be prepared to take costs. And that's the resolve part. The power part is, hey, I can inflict damage on you. So it's one thing to say, hey, I'm going to suffer everything I can suffer for my cause. Imagine sort of a hunger strike or something like that. Sure, but yeah, okay. And now it depends. Maybe the government does care about keeping you alive. Maybe they don't. Maybe they're happy that you would die from a hunger strike or something. Right? That shows a lot of resolve, but it doesn't show that you have the power to damage them. Right? Just that you have the sort of power to damage yourself, which might not be super useful all the time. But so you also want to show that you have the power. We, the IRA, the ANC, the Al Qaeda, ISIS, perhaps. Yeah, definitely ISIS. we have the power. We have the means to inflict damage on you, and part of that probably means we have weapons, we have guns, we have the ability to make bombs. We can blow ourselves up, and we can do it in places that are going to hurt you. Right? The IRA plants a bomb in Manchester shopping centre the day before Father's Day or something like that. Death. We can cause death and destruction in your main cities. This is not just something that we're going to do outside in the countryside when there's not many people. We can come right into the heart of your capital city, into your financial district, and we can blow that up and cause you real cost of life, of civilian life, cost to your economy, cost to your infrastructure. We can do that. Right? So we're prepared to do it, we're prepared to take the consequences of it, and we can do it. And that's the attrition strategy, where you have ways to show that. Again, ways beyond just saying it. Right? You've got to show that you can do it. And think of for yourselves like how you might do that, right? And just look at terrorism and what terrorists do, and that's what it is. The last strategies. So there's 2 strategies that affect your enemy. One is attrition, right? Taking the damage and dealing out the damage over a long period of time, and under difficult circumstances. That's what attrition. Spoiling is the separate one that has the goal to your enemy. Sometimes on the terrorists' political side, there'll be more moderates. Right? Think of Fatah and Hamas in Palestine. I just label them both terrorists, but the United States does that too. So Fatah and Hamas, at least Hamas are terrorists for the United States. Fatah maybe are the more moderate, and Hamas are the more the less moderate, right? The more extreme. So it might be that, let's say, the United States wants to talk to Fatah, right? Wants to talk to the Palestinians through Fatah. They're more moderate, right? It's more acceptable to talk to them. And maybe they think they can get some concessions, or maybe Israel wants to do this, get some concessions from Fatah. And let's say they come to some sort of agreement. So spoiling is this. Spoiling is Hamas coming along and saying, and firing rockets into Israel while the talks are going on. Say, you can talk to them all you like, but you're not going to stop the bombings. You're not going to stop the rocket attacks through talking to them. And also trying to undermine the trustworthiness. Let's say Fatah said, right, let's have these negotiations. We'll stop the violence, right? Well, now Hamas are perpetrating violence, and the Israel, the partner, the negotiation partner of Fatah, say, look, they're not trustworthy. They told us they were going to stop the violence, and maybe they don't have the power to do that, or maybe maybe they're doing that on purpose, right? This sort of part of the negotiation tactic. So that undermines the trustworthiness of I suppose their own side, but maybe the moderate part of their own side, right? So that's that part, the trustworthiness. The other audience is their own population. So they want to communicate to their enemy, and they want to communicate again, not through talking, but through action, to show how resolved they are, to show that they really do have the power, to show that they are either sort of not trustworthy if they're going to go against their main principles. That's one target. The other person you want to talk to is your own population, right? Which again might vary depending on who you are. Maybe for the IRA, it's Catholics in Northern Ireland, perhaps. Maybe it's the whole of Ireland. Maybe maybe for think about ISIS, right, when they're operating out in, and this has been, ISIS is sort of a thing of the past as well now. But if we think about ISIS, the villages and the towns that they're occupying, they now have a population, right, right there that they want to talk to, right, and again, they might want to show their own population that they have the power and the resolve and the trustworthiness. The trustworthiness thing is an interesting word, I think. I'm not sure I fully like the term that they're using, but here's how it goes. Intimidation, right? We want to show our own population, hey, we have the power here. We're the ones in control. If you want something done, you come to us. You're gonna live by our laws, or we're gonna cut your head off in the street. Right? That's a good show of power. That's intimidation. It says, hey, if you disobey our rules, ISIS, right? We're ISIS. We're controlling this city now, not the government. Or not anybody else for that matter. We're controlling it, and if you don't live by our rules, we're going to cut your heads off in the street, and we're going to show everybody that what happens if you don't follow what we want. The IRA did they would kneecap burglars and that sort of thing, right? If you, I'm sure they did worse things probably as well. Probably assassinated people in their own populations, I imagine. What I would hear about is the kneecapping. They would sort of keep law and order in their part of Belfast or something, right? So intimidation, don't mess with us. We have the power here. We're going to show you that. Don't go to the police. The police are not going to help you. You go to the police, we'll come around and shoot your kneecaps out as well. So that's like the way they show their resolve. This is outbidding, right? So this again. A lot of my examples are from Northern Ireland because this is what I suppose I grew up with. But you always had two during the 80s and the 90s. You always had two political parties on each side of the divide, right? You had the DUP and the Ulster Unionist Party, right? The Ulster Unionists in my time were much more moderate, right? And the DUP were much more. They had the links to the loyalist paramilitaries, right? The sort of counterparts of the IRA on the British side. The DUP had those sort of more radical links, and the UUP were much more moderate, who you could sort of, the British government could talk to them and openly, and people that wanted an end to the violence could vote for them. The DUP were a little bit more militant. And on the Republican side, it was the same, right? You had the SDLP were the more moderate ones, and Sinn Féin were the ones that were linked to the IRA. And so again, you want to show that your group, if you're the DUP, you're going to outbid, right? The outbidding is to say, look, we're the ones you have to deal with, I guess, to their own population. No, you want to show that you're the most resolved to your own population because you want their support. You want to show we're the ones who are going to get this done for you. We're the ones who are, and so in order to do that, you have to be more extreme. You have to make more extreme statements, but again, the statements are enough. You've got to do more extreme actions to sort of give the impression to your guys that, look, I'm sorry that, I'm sorry, but if you go with these moderates, they're not going to get it done for you. Your own population, the population saying, look, I wish I could support these moderate guys, but look, nobody's listening to them. It's the IRA that's in the news. It's the IRA that are getting this done. So if I want a united Ireland, I'd like to do it peacefully. I'd like to go with the moderates, but these are the guys of action, right? So it's trying to impress your own population. I'm going to end it there, really, but that's a good sort of core sort of information for this reading.